Gold Coast was a British colony on the Gulf of Guinea in West Africa that became the independent nation of Ghana in 1957. The first Europeans to arrive at the coast were the Portuguese in 1471. Upon their arrival they encountered a variety of African kingdoms, some of whom controlled substantial deposits of gold in the soil. In 1482 the Portuguese built the castle of El Manathe, first European settlement on the Gold Coast. From here they traded slaves, gold, knives, beads, mirrors, rum and guns. News spread quickly and eventually English, Dutch, Danish, Prussian and Swedish traders arrived as well. These European traders built several forts along the coastline. The Gold Coast had long been a name for the region used by Europeans due to the large gold resources found in the area, although slave trade was the principal exchange for a number of years. The British Gold Coast was formed in 1821 when the British government abolished the African Company of Merchants and seized privately held lands along the coast. The remaining interests of other European countries were taken over by the British, who took over the Danish Gold Coast in 1850 and the Dutch Gold Coast, including Fort Elmina, in 1871. Britain steadily expanded the colony through the invasion of local kingdoms as well, particularly the Ashanti Confederacy and Fante Confederacy. The main British problem was the Ashanti people, who controlled much of Ghana before the Europeans arrived and are still today the biggest community in Ghana. 4 Worcester Anglo-Ashanti Warswere fought between the Ashanti, Asante, and the British, who were sometimes in alliance with the Fante. During the First Anglo-Ashanti War, 1863–1864, the two groups fought because of a disagreement over an Ashanti chief and slavery. Tensions increased in 1874 during the Second Ashanti War, 1873–1874, when the British sacked the Ashanti capital of Kumasi. The Third Ashanti War, 1893–1894, occurred because the new Ashanti Asante Heneruler of the Ashanti wanted to exercise his new title. From 1895 to 1896 the British and Ashanti fought in the Fourth and final Ashanti War, where the Ashanti fought for and lost their independence. In 1900 the Ashanti Uprising occurred. ND resulted in the capture and loss of Kumasi. This was due to an attempt to steal the Golden Stool, the Asetahene's throne. At the end of this last Ashanti War, the Shanti people became a protectorate on 1 January 1902. By 1901 all of the Gold Coast was a British colony with its kingdoms and tribes forming a single unit. Various natural resources, such as gold, metal ores, diamonds, ivory, pepper, timber, corn and cocoa, were shipped from the Gold Coast by the British. The British colonizers built railways and a complicated transport infrastructure which formed the basis for the transport infrastructure in modern-day Ghana. Western hospitals and schools were also built, an attempt by the British to export what were then modern-day amenities to the people of the empire. However, by 1945 demands for more autonomy by the Gold Coast population were beginning to arise in the wake of the end of the Second World War and the beginnings of the decolonization process across the world. By 1956 British Togoland, the Ashanti Protectorate and the Fante Protectorate were merged with the Gold Coast to create one colony which became known as the Gold Coast. In 1957 the colony gained independence under the name of Ghana.
By the early 19th century, the British, through conquest or purchase, had become masters of most of the forts along the coast. Two major factors laid the foundations of British rule and the eventual establishment of a colony on the Gold Coast: British reaction to the Asante Wars and the resulting instability and disruption of trade, and Britain's increasing preoccupation with the suppression and elimination of the slave trade. During most of the 19th century, Asante, the most powerful state of the Akan interior, sought to expand its rule and to promote and protect its trade. The first Asante invasion of the coastal regions took place in 1807. The Asante moved south again in 1811 and in 1814. These invasions, though not decisive, disrupted trade in such products as gold, timber, and palm oil, and threatened the security of the European forts. Local British, Dutch, and Danish authorities were all forced to come to terms with Asante, and in 1817 the African Company of Merchants signed a treaty of friendship that recognized Asante claims to sovereignty over large areas of the coast and its peoples. The coastal people, primarily some of the Fante and the inhabitants of the new town of Accra, who were chiefly Ga, came to rely on British protection against Asante incursions, but the ability of the merchant companies to provide this security was limited. The British Crown dissolved the company in 1821, giving authority over British forts on the Gold Coast to Governor Charles McCarthy, Governor of Sierra Leone. The British forts and Sierra Leone remained under common administration for the first half of the century. McCarthy's mandate was to impose peace and to end the slave trade. He sought to do this by encouraging the coastal peoples to oppose Kumasi rule and by closing the great roads to the coast. Incidents and sporadic warfare continued, however. McCarthy was killed, and most of his force was wiped out in a battle with Asante forces in 1824. An Asante invasion of the coast in 1826 was defeated, nonetheless, by a combined force of British and local forces, including the Fante and the people of Accra. When the British government allowed control of the Gold Coast settlements to revert to the British African Company of Merchants in the late 1820s, relations with Asante were still problematic. From the Asante point of view, the British had failed to control the activities of their local coastal allies. Had this been done, Asante might not have found it necessary to attempt to impose peace on the coastal peoples. McCarthy's encouragement of coastal opposition to Asante and the subsequent 1824 British military attack further indicated to Asante authorities that the Europeans, especially the British, did not respect Asante. In 1830 a London Committee of Merchants chose Captain George Maclean to become president of a local council of merchants. Although his formal jurisdiction was limited, Maclean's achievements were substantial. For example, a peace treaty was arranged with Asante in 1831. Maclean also supervised the coastal people by holding regular court in Cape Coast where he punished those found guilty of disturbing the peace. Between 1830 and 1843, while Maclean was in charge of affairs on the Gold Coast, no confrontations occurred with Asante, and the volume of trade reportedly increased threefold. Maclean's exercise of limited judicial power on the coast was so effective that a parliamentary committee recommended that the British government permanently administer its settlements and negotiate treaties with the coastal chiefs that would define Britain's relations with them. The government did so in 1843, the same year Crown government was reinstated. Commander H. Worsley Hill was appointed first governor of the Gold Coast. Under Maclean's administration, several coastal tribes had submitted voluntarily to British protection. Hill proceeded to define the conditions and responsibilities of his jurisdiction over the protected areas. He negotiated a special treaty with a number of Fante and other local chiefs that became known as the Bond of 1844. This document obliged local leaders to submit serious crimes, such as murder and robbery, to British jurisdiction and laid the legal foundation for subsequent British colonization of the coastal area. Additional coastal states as well as other states farther inland eventually signed the bond, and British influence was accepted, strengthened, and expanded. Under the terms of the 1844 arrangement, the British gave the impression that they would protect the coastal areas. Thus, an informal protectorate came into being. As responsibilities for defending local allies and managing the affairs of the coastal protectorate increased, the administration of the Gold Coast was separated from that of Sierra Leone in 1850. At about the same time, growing acceptance of the advantages offered by the British presence led to the initiation of another important step. In April 1852, local chiefs and elders met at Cape Coast to consult with the governor on means of raising revenue. With the governor's approval, the Council of Chiefs constituted itself as a legislative assembly. In approving its resolutions, the governor indicated that the Assembly of Chiefs should become a permanent fixture of the Protectorate's constitutional machinery, but the Assembly was given no specific constitutional authority to pass laws or to levy taxes without the consent of the people. In 1873, British influence over the Gold Coast increased further when Britain purchased Elmina Castle, the last of the Dutch forts along the coast. The Asante, who for years had considered the Dutch at Elmina as their allies, thereby lost their last trade outlet to the sea. To prevent this loss and to ensure that revenue received from that post continued, the Asante staged their last invasion of the coast in 1873. After early successes, they finally came up against well-trained British forces who compelled them to retreat beyond the Pra River. Later attempts to negotiate a settlement of the conflict with the British were rejected by the commander of their forces, Major General Sir Garnet Wolseley. To settle the Asante problem permanently, the British invaded Asante with a sizable military force. The attack, launched in January 1874 by 2,500 British soldiers and large numbers of African auxiliaries, resulted in the occupation and burning of Kumasi, the Asante capital. The subsequent peace treaty required the Asante to renounce any claim to many southern territories. The Asante also had to keep the road to Kumasi open to trade. From this point on, Asante power steadily declined. The Confederation slowly disintegrated as subject territories broke away and as protected regions defected to British rule. The warrior spirit of the nation was not entirely subdued, however, and enforcement of the treaty led to recurring difficulties and outbreaks of fighting. In 1896 the British dispatched another expedition that again occupied Kumasi and that forced Asante to become a protectorate of the British Crown. The position of Asantine was abolished and the incumbent was exiled. The core of the Asante Federation accepted these terms grudgingly. In 1900 the Asante rebelled again in the War of the Golden Stool but were defeated the next year, and in 1902 the British proclaimed Asante a colony under the jurisdiction of the Governor of the Gold Coast. The annexation was made with misgivings and recriminations on both sides. With Asante subdued and annexed, British colonization of the region became a reality.